The whole question of what it even means to be a good person has been bugging philosophers for thousands of years. Everyone's got their angle, but one of the answers that's really stuck around, maybe because it actually works in day-to-day life, is the one the Stoics gave. They popped up in Athens around 300 BCE, and no, they weren't these cold, poker-faced statues we sometimes imagine. Stoicism, when you really look at it, is less about being an emotionless rock and more about figuring out how to live well, ethically, rationally, and with this almost cosmic sense of belonging. The Stoics didn't buy into the usual markers of success. Not money, not status, not the quick buzz of pleasure that leaves you empty 5 minutes later. Being a good person for them was an inside job. It was about shaping your character so it lined up with nature itself, which sounds lofty, but is actually really grounding. And they boiled it down into 4 simple but not easy virtues: wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. When I first read that, I remember thinking, okay, that's basically what every superhero movie is trying to tell us. But the Stoics meant it in the most practical, everyday sense. This video is going to unpack that path, not just the abstract philosophy, but the actual practice, how you act, the idea of oikeiosis, which is this natural impulse to connect and care, and ultimately the vision of yourself as a citizen of the entire cosmos. Big picture stuff, sure, but also surprisingly down to earth once you get into it. At its core, Stoic philosophy isn't just some dusty set of rules or abstract thought experiment. It's a whole way of living, a framework for figuring out how to actually flourish in life. The Greeks had a word for that, eudaimonia, hard to translate cleanly, but think of it as a kind of deep well-being that goes beyond just being happy. The whole movement started with Zeno of Citium, this shipwrecked merchant who began teaching under a painted porch in Athens. That public porch, called the Stoa, is literally where the name Stoic comes from. And then it spread. You had Epictetus, a man who started life as a slave but ended up one of history's most respected teachers. Then there's Seneca, a wealthy statesman who also wrote plays. And of course, Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher emperor, scribbling notes to himself in between battles. What blows me away is how different these men were, yet they all practiced the same philosophy. It really drives home the Stoic idea that wisdom isn't reserved for ivory towers. It's for everyone, no matter where you land in life. The system itself has 3 parts: logic, physics, and ethics. Logic's about clear thinking. Physics, in its sense, is more like trying to understand the big picture of how the universe works. But ethics? That's the real heartbeat of Stoicism. The Stoics argued that virtue, the strength of your character, is the only thing that truly makes a life good. Everything else, wealth, reputation, even health, those were what they called indifference. Not that they didn't matter at all, but they weren't the yardstick for a good life. I remember reading that and thinking, wait, so if I lose everything tomorrow, I could still, in theory, live a good life. It's a radical idea, and honestly, it takes some sitting with. They narrowed goodness down into 4 cardinal virtues: wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. But here's the catch. They didn't see them as separate boxes to tick. It's all one unified thing, different angles of the same diamond. Wisdom is knowing what truly matters. Justice is applying that wisdom when you deal with other people. Courage is sticking to it when it gets hard. And temperance is knowing when enough is enough. Sounds simple on paper, but try actually living it for a day. Easier said than done. The Stoics also had this beautiful idea of living according to nature, which doesn't mean moving to the woods or hugging trees, though honestly, that doesn't sound bad. What they meant was living in harmony with logos, the rational structure that runs through the cosmos. Humans, unlike animals, can understand that structure, at least in part. And when we align our choices with it, that's where virtue and real happiness comes from. I don't know about you, but when I catch myself living out of sync with that, when I'm chasing things that don't matter, it feels off. The Stoics would say that's the misalignment, and they'd be right. The Stoics' whole idea of being a good person was meant to be lived, applied in the grit of daily life. That's where the so-called discipline of action comes in. It's one of 3 core practices they leaned on to actually translate their philosophy into something practical. And this one's all about behavior, how you show up in the world, how you act with intention, instead of just drifting on autopilot. The Stoics believed that our choices should come from reason and virtue, not knee-jerk reactions or whatever emotion happens to flare up in the moment. Now, there's this word, apatheia, that trips people up. Most folks hear it and think, oh, so Stoics wanted to be robots, right? Just numb and unfeeling. But that's way off. What they meant was freedom from the kind of wild, irrational passions that sweep you away. Rage, crippling fear, obsessive craving. Trust me, I've sent a text in anger before and instantly regretted it. That's the kind of stuff they were warning against. Apatheia doesn't mean killing your feelings. It means having enough inner calm that your emotions don't hijack your judgment. You still feel, but you're steering the ship instead of being dragged behind it. And here's the part I love. Stoicism isn't passive. It's not sit still and accept everything. It's about engaging actively, just doing it with clarity and purpose. Their tools were surprisingly modern too. Daily reflection, mindfulness. Marcus Aurelius, the emperor himself, kept what was basically a private journal, his meditations. Imagine ruling half the known world and still sitting down at night to scribble reminders like, hey, don't be arrogant, or remember, life is short. He'd write about his mistakes, the pettiness of others, and how fleeting it all is as a way to keep himself honest. That constant self-check became like an internal feedback loop, spotting where he'd slipped, nudging himself closer to virtue. Honestly, it's not that different from journaling today, except his notebook went on to become one of the greatest philosophy books ever written. One of the big ideas in Stoic ethics, maybe the idea that explains why being good can't just mean sitting alone in your room being virtuous, is this thing called oikeiosis. Fancy Greek word, but the gist is simple. It's about how we expand our sense of concern beyond ourselves. The word comes from oikeion, which means something like to make one's own. Picture it as a ripple effect. You start with yourself in the middle, and then the circles widen. Family, friends, community, and eventually all of humanity. It begins with something basic, survival. Every living creature, from a bird to a toddler, has this built-in instinct to care for itself. Feed me, protect me, keep me alive. But humans are a bit different. As we grow into our rational minds, that instinct kind of upgrades. We realize it's not just about food and shelter. It's about living well, morally. Our well-being isn't just physical. It's tied up with our character. And if you've ever felt guilty for snapping at someone or proud after helping them out, you know that feeling. That's the shift, from raw self-preservation to moral self-care. As this idea stretches outward, it reshapes how the Stoics thought about empathy and relationships. Sure, you prioritize your family and your close circle first. That's only natural. But it doesn't stop there. We're still connected to strangers, even people we'll never meet. The Stoic philosopher Hierocles had this cool exercise to train that muscle. Imagine those outer circles getting pulled closer. Picture strangers as neighbors, neighbors as friends. It sounds a bit idealistic, but try it sometime. It really does change the way you look at people standing next to you in line or scrolling by in the news. For the Stoics, this wasn't abstract moralizing. Oikeiosis was a kind of ethical roadmap, a reminder that being good isn't just about me and my virtue. It's also about stretching that sense of kinship outward until justice and benevolence aren't just lofty words, but daily habits. The Stoics had this bold idea. The universe isn't just a random collection of stuff floating around. It's alive, in a sense, an interconnected whole, governed by this single rational principle they called logos. That belief gave them their philosophy of interconnectedness, and it changes everything about what it means to be good. Suddenly, morality isn't just about being nice to your neighbor or paying your taxes. It's about recognizing that you're a part of something way bigger, a cosmic order, and that your responsibilities stretch way past your own little circle. Marcus Aurelius put it perfectly, as he often does. We were made to work together, like feet, hands, eyelids, or the two rows of teeth. The image is kind of funny, teeth cooperating, but it drives the point home. To fight against each other is to fight against nature itself. This is where oikeiosis folds back in, because it's what makes us feel that belonging, that duty to others, not just to ourselves. And layered on top of that is another Stoic concept, sympatheia. Think of it as cosmic sympathy. a recognition that everything is linked. The Stoics really believed that when a star burns out, when a tree falls halfway across the world, it isn't just some distant event. It's connected to us because we're woven into the same fabric. You see how a tiny thing, like someone cutting you off in traffic, ripples into your mood, your words to others, even their day, and you realize maybe they were onto something. The old Stoic writings are full of this way of looking at life. Marcus especially was obsessed with the idea of flux and change. He'd remind himself again and again that nothing stands still, that every little shift is part of a larger flow. And he'd tell himself not to see things as isolated annoyances or random strokes of luck, but as pieces of a single unfolding story, the universe doing what it does. That perspective, it's humbling. It pulls you out of the petty stuff, your grudges, your little dramas, and shoves you back into the bigger picture. And maybe that's the real Stoic secret. Being a good person isn't just about keeping your own soul in order. It's about syncing yourself with the whole damn cosmos. When you put it all together, the virtues, the discipline of action, and this whole idea of oikeiosis, Stoicism starts to feel less like abstract philosophy and more like a roadmap for becoming a decent human being. Not perfect, the Stoics weren't naive about that, but better, bit by bit. The process isn't about flipping a switch and suddenly living like Marcus Aurelius. It's about showing up, day after day, making deliberate choices, slowly widening your circle of care. Oikeiosis, in that sense, is like a compass. It pulls you away from the small, self-absorbed point of view and towards something bigger, a cosmopolitan perspective. It explains why we even bother with justice or generosity in the first place. Because deep down, it's in our nature, as rational social beings, to look after each other. The beauty of oikeiosis is that it works on two levels. First, it gives you a reason to act well. Your happiness is tangled up with the happiness of others. So when you widen your moral concern, you're actually strengthening your own well-being. And second, it gives you a way to practice. You don't jump straight to saving the world. You start small, help your family, show up for your friends, extend kindness to the people right in front of you. Slowly, those ripples move outward. That's where justice comes in, not as some abstract law book definition, but as wisdom applied to human relationships. And really, that's the heart of Stoic ethics, the slow, steady expansion of care. You begin with yourself, but you don't stay there. You keep pushing the boundary outward, cultivating compassion and responsibility that stretches beyond what feels comfortable. The Stoics believed that if enough of us lived this way, society would naturally fall into harmony. Not some rigid, idealized utopia like Plato's Republic, nothing so artificial, but a community stitched together by individual commitments to reason and kinship. And honestly, that's a powerful idea. That a better world doesn't start with grand revolutions or perfect blueprints, but with each of us, here and now, just trying to be a little more good. For the Stoics, the endgame of all this ethical talk, the thing it was building toward, was this idea of being a citizen of the cosmos. Not just of Athens or Rome, not just of your family or tribe, but of the whole damn universe. Epictetus really hammered this home. He told his students, don't think of yourself as some tiny cog in a machine, bound to one little state or group. Think of yourself as one of the leading parts of the whole, because you can actually understand the divine order, the way things fit together. That's your role, to see it, to act from it. Suddenly, duty isn't about pledging blind loyalty to some flag or nation. It's about your responsibility to humanity itself, and even beyond that, to the larger order of the cosmos. This perspective, if you take it seriously, changes everything. It creates a deep sense of kinship. You can't look at another human being, no matter their background, without remembering they share the same rational spark as you. For their time, that was wildly progressive. Seneca, for example, insisted slaves deserved humane treatment. The Stoics argued women had the same capacity for virtue as men, which was radical stuff in ancient Rome. They saw goodness as something that transcended all those artificial walls we love to build: class, gender, race, borders. If you're a good person, you don't just protect your own circle, you extend justice and benevolence outward to everyone. So, what does it mean to be good in Stoic terms? It's stepping into that role of cosmic citizenship. It's remembering every action you take ripples into the whole. It's living with an awareness that you're woven into this vast fabric and your thread, small as it is, still matters. The Stoics weren't selling some tidy little self-help formula to feel calmer at work or sleep better at night. They were pointing to something way bigger, a life that isn't just about you, but about aligning yourself with reason, with virtue, and with the harmony of everything. And honestly, that's a calling big enough to give your life some serious weight. Stoicism, at the end of the day, is less a relic of old philosophy and more like a blueprint for how to actually try being decent. It flips the script, away from chasing applause or stacking up stuff towards shaping your inner character, away from cheap thrills that fade overnight towards something sturdier, virtue. The Stoics believe that if you live in line with reason, if you sync yourself with the natural order of things, the universe, the cosmos, whatever you want to call it, you start to change. You learn to act with intention, calmly, without getting yanked around by every emotional storm. And as you grow, you push past just looking out for yourself. You widen the circle through oikeiosis until your care includes, well, everyone. That's the heart of it. A Stoic doesn't just try to be good for themselves. They try to be good in a way that matters for all of humanity. And no, it's not easy. Nothing worth it ever is. But the tools are there if you want them. Daily reflection, little moments of pause before you react, even just remembering that you're part of a much bigger web of life. All of that keeps you on track. The journey's messy, sure, but it's also noble. Achievable too, if you're willing to keep at it. It's something you practice every day in the way you think, act, and connect to the world around you. If ideas like these spark your curiosity, subscribe so you never miss the next big question we explore. Watch the next video.